This is Made for More Living with Johnny Jennings, powered by eXp Realty. Online at madeformoreliving.com.
22 years. That is how long this meeting has been taking place every single Thursday. It's a Realtor meeting started by Brent Gove. And in 22 years, probably the best presentation we have ever heard is something that you're about to hear right now. It's the 5 different ways you can increase your return on investment, and it's taught by Barry Mathis. Barry, what are the 5 ways?
Oh, before I even get started, that kind of introduction is crazy. I've been at many of those meetings, and many of them were much better than anything I could ever come up with.
We'll see. We'll let the people decide.
Right. So we're going to run through these. I know we're on a clock here. Cash flow is one of the major returns on investment. And in California, a lot of people look at cash flow and they say, oh, well, that's not very much. And yes, that's true. Cash flow is tough to find in California. You have to really work at it. But it is only one of 5 different returns on investment. And I'm gonna give away the last one real quick, and that's appreciation. Appreciation is also a return on investment. And so what do I mean by that? You know, if you spend $100,000 to buy a $500,000 building, you put down $100,000. Yep. Then you realize that $500,000 building is going to appreciate at 4% a year. Let's just say, be conservative, 4% a year. So what is 4% of $500,000?
20 grand.
So 20 grand. So now you've got your $100,000 that you put down in order to get 20 grand worth of equity. So 20 divided by 100 is what?
20%.
So you made a 20% return, not dealing with cash flow, not dealing with equity, not dealing with interest, not dealing with depreciation, only with an assumed conservative appreciation. Now, if you have cash flow on top of that, you have some rent coming in. If you look at the duplex index, which is an index that I created here in Sacramento area, we look at all the duplexes that sold in the last quarter, and we figure out how much rent were they generating versus how much they sold for, and we apply an assumed expense factor to them that's fairly common across 100 duplexes, and we find that currently that duplex index is at 4.5%, what we call a cap rate, a 4.5% cap rate. That translates into that cash flow number, right? So you've got 20% coming from appreciation and 4.5% coming from that cash flow.
And these are typically the 2 big ones people think about. The thing about cash flow and the thing about appreciation. But there's 3 more, right? There
are 3 more, and they're not complicated. They're not huge, but they definitely add value. So number 1, who's paying down your principal balance?
The tenant.
The tenant is, right. So that equity pay down equals a return on investment. So in the beginning, you're going to have about 22% going towards principal on a mortgage. So after your $400,000 loan, 22% of that payment's going towards the principal, and about 68% of that is interest. And so that 22% is being paid down every year by your tenants.
Yep.
And so we're not going to do the math on the air. I've done math on the air a whole lot, but basically you take whatever that 22% equity pay down is, divide it by that original $100,000 that you used to get your down payment, and that's going to give you what that return on investment is from the equity pay down.
And this is on top of the cash flow.
On top of the cash flow and on top of the appreciation.
Yep.
So most likely we're probably somewhere around a 30% return on investment now when we add just those 3 up. On the other side of it, most investors are allowed to deduct the interest. Meaning, when I say allowed, I mean that they have enough income coming in both from this property and from other properties or from other sources of income that they're able to deduct the interest payment. And depending on what your tax bracket is, in California, your tax bracket could range anywhere from 20 all the way up to nearly 40%. So depending on what that tax bracket is, you're going to take that interest deduction, the amount you paid in interest, multiply that times your tax bracket, and that's the value of your interest deduction. Divide that by your $100,000 down payment, and now you'll have what the return on investment was from the interest deduction. Now, if you look out at insurance companies are the largest owner across the nation of apartment buildings. For one thing, apartment buildings require a lot of money. But 2, insurance companies have a lot of money in the form of something they call float. right? And the float, if you ever hear Warren Buffett talk about why he bought Geico, the float is what they use to invest while they're waiting for the next major disaster to happen, right? So they take that money, they buy these properties, and then they get, on top of that, they get to deduct all of those interest payments and all the other expenses of running those apartments, as well as the one that we're going to talk about also, which is depreciation. And this one is the big hidden factor. This one, I think most people don't even realize it because they don't think like an insurance company, but I guarantee you it's why insurance companies buy apartments. And so, are you familiar with the depreciation? Sorry, I don't want to keep rambling.
No, I'm totally, I am familiar with it. 27 and a half years. It's the building, not the land.
There you go.
But for those who don't know, mind going into why
so I'll jump into it.
Yeah.
So with what you just said is exactly right. Let's take the value of that $500,000 purchase. Let's say that 80% of that is the improvements of the property, and 20% is the land, the value in the land. And so then we would say 80% of that is $400,000. So that $400,000 divided by 27 and a half, which is what the government says it would take to use up all of that money. So that would be $14,545 in depreciation that you get to take against that property. So at the end of the time, even though we call this a paper loss, if you've ever heard that term before, it's a loss that happens on paper, but in reality, we know that the building we're standing in right now is probably older than 27 years, and it's still very, very valuable and still producing quite a bit of income. And so you get to depreciate that property.
So I'm so curious how that works, though. Like, why is the building... Like, why do they let us do this? Because the building is increasing in value. Right. You're already getting the cash flow, and now I'm able to take a paper loss on something that's kind of happening, but not really. Like, why do you think they let us do that? Well, I think that's probably a bigger question than I have the education to answer. But I would say that that's a form of the government wanting to encourage investment, wanting to encourage ownership. So they let you deduct the interest, and then they let you deduct and depreciate the property. And both of those things cause people and companies to want to invest, right? So it gives them a reason to invest and shelter some of their money from taxes. And so I think that's why it originally started. I hope that it continues throughout my kids' lifetime, with all the insane ideas and conversations around unrealized capital gains and wealth taxes and things like that. I hope that this always stays there. I hope the interest deduction always stays there, and I definitely hope that depreciation's not understood, but it probably is probably bigger, in fact, than what the interest deduction is. And so it's very seldom understood. With all of those things combined, what I think you're going to find is even a moderately cash flowing property in the state of California that's just covering the expenses by the taxes, the insurance, the mortgage payment, just covering it by $200, $300, not very much money. That moderate property is actually probably producing close to a 35 to 40% return on investment. That initial $100,000. Absolutely. And so I just don't know of another way that the average person, that we hear a lot talked about diversity and things like that. I don't know of another way to take the average person that doesn't have a rich family, that doesn't have all these things passed down to them, too much privilege where they grew up. You can take anybody from any walk of life, and they go into real estate, they start buying a property, and they're going to make it if they continue down that path. It's not a get rich quick, it's a get rich slow, but it's a get rich program. What is it Warren Buffett says? You mentioned him earlier with the Geico analogy, but the number one rule of investing is... don't really lose the money. And I think number two is see rule number one or something like that. That is correct. And so that's what's so great about real estate. If you're looking to start investing in real estate or just factoring the cash on cash return, it's so safe. It is. I've got a project right now that we're looking for investors on in Sacramento, North Sac. It's a 3-bedroom, 2-bath, $335,000. We're going to buy that. We're going to put money into it. We'll probably put $35,000 into it. We'll sell that for $415,000.
right? And it's not a big home run. It's not some making $500,000 on a deal. It's just what we do. Pick up $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 on a transaction. Put that back into another property. Property up in Grass Valley, $500,000 property, purchase price at $525,000. When we finish that one, it'll have an $85,000 repair. When we finish that, it'll be at $725,000. Right. Wow. So that one will make a little more money. It takes more investment, takes a lot more time. I've got a property I just bought in Applegate that is going to be a great investment for my kids. And it's their way of getting a leg up, right? Yeah. Instead of going out and trying to rent one of my rentals at $2,200, I literally have a 1-bedroom that is going to be going for close to $2,000, right?
Wow. Where?
In Roseville.
Okay.
But it's just a lot of money to get out there as a first timer and you're trying to start your family. I look at my kids and I'm like, man, if they don't do some real estate, how are they going to get ahead?
Yep.
If you're out there making $20, $25, $30 an hour, it's going to be very hard to get ahead in real estate in California unless you buy something ugly and make it pretty.
So I was listening to a guy on Instagram. I'm blanking on his name. Fairly well known guy, but he was saying you need to. I'm not trying not to be offensive here, but he said, and I'm just quoting him, that poor people invest for cash flow, rich people, wealthy people tend to look for the appreciation. So poor people will buy properties in poor communities that are going to have stronger cash flows, but their appreciation isn't going to be as strong because it's not an up and coming. It's not a more desirable neighborhood. What is your take on that, cash flow versus appreciation?
Well, you're definitely right. I mean, if you have, if we use cap rate as a proxy for value, right? So if you have a higher cap rate, they work inversely with each other. So if you have a higher cap rate, you're going to usually have higher cash flow, right? And so I can go into some poorer communities and buy properties with an 8 to a 12 cap. If I go into Roseville and buy a very nice house that people live in there in Roseville, you'll have a 3 or a 4 cap, right? So you can see the difference right there. Almost 4 times as much if I take on more risk. And that's what it is. It's taking on risk. If you're comfortable taking on risk, great. The part of the problem, what you mentioned, though, is the people with more money have more time to wait. They have the ability to let that market take its course. Because even though I said 4% appreciation, in some years it might be no appreciation or negative appreciation. But if I've got a 10-year span, I'm probably going to have 8 or 9 or 12% appreciation. So it just depends on that time frame. And being poor causes you to make decisions that you wouldn't otherwise make. I'm telling you, I've made a lot of decisions because I felt the crunch of money and being poor that no sane person would ever make, right? But you do have to watch out for cash flow when you're poor. I think that's probably one thing that investors do a little too much of, is they buy a property without accounting for a buffer.
Yep.
Like I know a property manager that taught me that taught me management here. Chris Aurora, if a lot of you know him. With Rent Pros, great guy, but he won't even take somebody on unless they have a reserve account for their property, right? Now I'm not talking the $400 that the property manager keeps. He wants them to have like 3 months in reserves in their bank account so that if emergencies come up on that property, they can handle it. And so I tell people, you need to not spend the money that you're making on cash flow. Let it build up, right? Build up 6 months in reserves or whatever cash you think you're going to need for that property. Treat your property like it was a job.
Exactly. Treat it like it's a job, and the cash flow will get you through. So the investor said, if you want to make more money, focus on the appreciation side. But in reality, you're going to need to focus on both. Because if the property is not cash flowing, you're not going to be able to hang in for the appreciation. I
love it when rich people tell me that I need to focus on something other than cash flow. Because when you're poor, money is like air, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you're fine until you run out, and then it's the only thing you can think about, right?
Correct.
So I think that there is a combination of that needs to happen. I think my version of that is I'll buy properties that need love, that need to be improved, that can have some sweat equity, make up for maybe the difference in appreciation, right? And so while appreciations might not be quite as strong as your beautiful property was, then you're going to see that the sweat equity makes a difference.
Forced appreciation.
However, I would say that if you look at real estate cycles, we've always said in real estate that it runs up from Southern California into the Bay Area and then out to Sacramento, and that's how the markets run. And I think there's a version of that true in every city. The market starts to really heat up on the outskirts right before it starts to fall again. So depending on how you time it, if you buy that property on the low in the outskirts when other people aren't really looking for properties out there, and then you wait for the next cycle, which will probably happen in 7 to 12 years, then you're going to see the outskirt become hot again. And when that becomes hot again, you sell the ones in the outskirt and come back and buy the solid stuff in the hub. And I think that's a longer term play that affects that. I remember the owner of Keller Williams.
Gary Keller?
No, the local one. The local Keller Williams office in Roseville. I can't think of his name for the life of me. But we managed his property, and he was a very smart guy and had a big office with 400 agents. And the only thing he would buy is brand new construction while they were still being built, and he would rent those out. And he said, I don't have to worry about them. There's no maintenance on them. The market's going to appreciate around it while the building is going on. And that was his version of that. But he was an experienced, well-to-do investor.
Got it. Well, hey, thank you so much, Barry, for sharing the 5 different returns on investment. Just to recap, it was cash flow, equity paydown, depreciation, what was the interest deduction, and then appreciation, the big dog.
And if you want to find more about that, I do have a certifiedinvestmentexpert.com. You can go there, and we've got a course on that. You can take it. Let me know, and I'll give you a discount.
And when we come back, we will be talking about how your environment can absolutely influence how much money you're making and your return on investment. Back in a sec.
Guys, there's a reason why nobody sells more homes in our area than Johnny Jennings and the Tom Daves real estate team. There's a reason why they have so many 5-star Google reviews. There's a reason why they get multiple offers for their clients, cash offers, why they move so quickly. And if you want to find out why, sit down, talk with him. He's a great guy, someone you can trust. Johnny Jennings, Made for More Living. You can reach out at made4living.com. Whether you are looking to put your home on the market or you're in the market for a new property, you want to buy a home, maybe it's something for a family member, or you want an investment property. Again, it's made4living.com. And of course, if you're a realtor, they'd love to have you on their team. Made4living.com.